know, there are ongoing conversations about the definition of the quote-unquote gay community. LGBTQI now it is, but really there are only two types of people in the world. Cat people and dog people. I have with me tonight the author of a book very much about dog people. Meet David Fredrickson, author of the book Life on All Fours. You're very much a dog person.
I am.
I love this book, and I'm a confessed dog person too. Tell me about the inspiration for this book.
Well, it was my dog, Rufus, who I had for 12 years. And the inspiration for the book is really around the way in which dogs bear witness to our story. And he bore witness to mine, and was at my feet, literally, while I wrote the book. And the great irony is when the book was finished in June, he died.
June of this year.
Yes.
Was Rufus's death expected, or?
He was 12, so he was reaching kind of that midpoint of a lifespan. Mm-hmm. But it was unexpected.
Did you have to put him down, or?
I did. Yeah.
That must have been hard.
It was very hard.
So this story that Rufus bore witness to, is it all autobiographical here, or how much of this is complete true, and how much is thinly veiled fiction?
Right. Well, I set out to write fiction.
Yeah.
And I'm a psychotherapist, so I didn't go to school to be a writer. So there were a lot of surprises along the way, and the book happened fairly organically. I didn't set out with an outline or an idea of even what the book was going to be. I just started writing, and it became what it became. And one of the surprises as a first-time author is how often I showed up on the page, even though it's fiction.
Were you trying not to show up on the page?
Well, interesting. When I tried not to show up on the page, that's when it wasn't true.
Right.
Like in one of the first drafts of the book, the main character was Jewish, and I had friends who looked at the draft and said, "This character is not Jewish," and so it was. So part of it was embracing the parts of myself that were in the book, in all the characters. I mean, that's the interesting thing about writing fiction is there's a piece of me in every one of the characters.
Right. I love the short synopsis of the book, a man, a dog, and the people they touch along the way. Without giving away the book to those who haven't read it, tell us a little bit about the story and the plot.
Okay. Well, as I said, the idea really began around the idea of bearing witness, and you know, with my background in mental health, I really believe in the process of bearing witness to people's stories. Mm-hmm. And so it's really two stories, but one journey. And the two stories, the one story is a very human story. It's about the main character, Ben Walker, who lives in San Francisco, and it's 1997. And as you know,
kind of the depths of the age years.
The 80s and most of the 90s were just devastating, just brutal. And so he lives through all of that. And he's one of those characters, and there are a lot of us, who AIDS was the perfect storm. So he comes into surviving the worst of the crisis and becomes positive. Mm-hmm. But he brings with him his childhood stuff around being taught that homosexuality is an abomination, some childhood traumas, and into this kind of mix, you know, AIDS happens.
Right.
And so and then in 1997, of course, we have the introduction of protease inhibitors, the first ray of hope in this really devastating, dismal kind of epidemic. But as this character kind of suggests, hope is a slippery slope, and not everybody can grasp it.
Yeah, you know, for those of us who have been around during these, you know, what is euphemistically called the AIDS years, I have never had the experience, but I have known of people who thought they were going to die, and then they found out they weren't.
Right.
You're a psychotherapist. Right. What does that do to someone?
Well, it's really a question of kind of living, and I think for some, I do some volunteer work at the Alliance Health Project and run support groups, and there are, I think the question of how do you live with this disease is a really powerful question, and I know there were some who actually felt almost tricked by the that they were going to live. Like they really presumed they were going to die, and it's a hard transition. You would think it would be people would be jumping.
Yahoo, right?
Yes, but it's not quite that simple. And the other point of the book really is to kind of expose the part of the story that people really don't want to hear, and that is that the epidemic is still here.
Right.
The people who are infected are living with debilitating side effects from the meds, potential of long-term effects as we age. So, and it's because it's a hard story, I really struggled with who would want to read it. And so that was...
Dogs are always good.
That's why the dog enters the picture.
I mean, I think when I ran into you on the street, I jokingly referred to it as the gay travels with Charlie, John Steinbeck's great.
Yeah,
I mean, you know,
right.
Dogs are friendly. You know,
Yes.
get a dog to tell the story.
Right.
So how much of Rufus is in here?
It's all Rufus. Rufus he's very present in the story.
Now, I know storytelling is very important to you, and I'm going to get the name of the group wrong, but there's an HIV education group that you work with that's based around storytelling, correct?
Yes. Well, the HIV Story Project, which I'm on their board, and it began with a compilation of shorts around the 30th anniversary of AIDS, where there were local, I think there are 30, a compilation of different stories in the Bay Area, and different filmmakers were matched with these people who had a story to tell. And so it's a very cross-section of stories. And from that compilation, the nonprofit came into being, and with the idea of, as with the quilt, the stories that were stitched into fabric. The HIV Story Project uses new media to really try to create a digital kind of quilt.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you talk about, you know, the mid-late 90s when for the first time there was hope in the form of medication.
Right.
How important is storytelling to keeping people alive once they've had a AIDS, HIV diagnosis? Do you think talking about it, telling our stories actually is helpful? And is there any data that says, yes, talking about it, laughing, smiling actually keeps you healthy?
Right. Well, Carl Rogers, you know, one of the founders of humanistic psychology, I'll slay his quote, but it goes something like, you know, the paradox is that it's not until I show up as I am that I can change. So the power of story is really kind of owning who you are and what your experiences are, and when you do that, that's when you can change. Right. I mean, I think we are conditioned to think that I'll change, and then I'll own my story, and then I'll be happy. But it actually starts with accepting ourselves exactly as we are, just as we are. Right. That change can happen.
So now you've got Life on All Fours, a novel, your first book.
Yes.
Are you still a mental health professional, or are you an author?
Good question. I'm not practicing currently, and I guess I would say I'm more of an author. I volunteer my time in the mental health profession, but I'm not practicing.
Right. You know, for those of us who came here in the 80s, kind of at the beginning of the epidemic, and went through all of that, whether it was Queer Nation, the Names Project, ACT UP, you know, it's talk about bearing witness.
Yes.
I know on a personal level, sometimes I see young people who seem to think that AIDS is yesterday's story. And in some cases, it really is. Right. But there are people still living with it, as you say, and people still dying from it. Right. How does that make you feel, not only as someone who has experienced AIDS, HIV on a very personal level, but as a mental health professional? How do you get through to people and say, you know, would you people please wake up?
Well, I think part of it is by telling the stories. I think story is an incredible way to, rather than preaching, it's a story, and the people are moved by story, I think, and for young people who haven't experienced it, I think telling the story is a way for them to become familiar with a piece of history, but there are lots of things that happened in that epidemic that were amazing as well. in terms of the community coming together, the strength that came from that. I mean, the perfect storm also created
people with lifeboats.
Yes.
You know, I've thought many times that thank God for lesbians, because I don't know what your experience was, but when I came to San Francisco, moved right into the Castro, it was Boys Town.
Yeah.
Right? And you didn't. There wasn't this natural camaraderie between lesbians and gay men, but for a while there, I mean, there were so many gay men dying within the 94114 that there became this, you know, Florence Nightingale syndrome. So one of the things that came out of the epidemic was strengthening, I think, of the relationship between parts of our community.
Right.
In our last few minutes, talk to me a little bit about Rufus personally.
Okay.
What was Rufus like? And talk to me about some of the things he witnessed, some of your memories. I mean, we all have memories of friends, and I think that's true of our four-legged ones as well.
Well, I got Rufus around the time that I stopped working, and I stopped working because I was having health issues related to HIV. And so he really witnessed my transition from this professional persona to the next stage of my life. And he was one of those dogs that everybody loved and everybody knew. He never met anybody he didn't love. He was exuberant and impossible, but full of joy. And there was a way in which he just, I mean, he was always with me. He would not leave my side. So he truly was someone who bore witness to everything that happened. And what I love about dogs, which I think has something to teach us about bearing witness, is he was intuitive, but he also lived his own life. I mean, he smelled and sniffed and licked his way through his life. And that's, I think, a good lesson. Yeah.
Well, dogs are very wise. Like I said, I came out of the closet as a dog person. I look forward to a lot of people reading Life on All Fours. A closing personal note, I remember a couple of years ago, our dear friend Anthony Turney, who we shared in common as a friend, his dog Drew came walking in, looked up at me, and I just turned down and said, "Drew, what's the meaning of life?" And she said, "Woof." And then she walked away. And I turned to my husband, Alfredo, and I said, "I just got told the meaning of life, and I don't speak dog. So I was told the meaning of life, and I don't know it."
Yes.
So sorry about that, folks. Next up, our conversation with marine biologist Shael Metsuda, talking to us about the incredible offerings of this year's Bay Area Science Festival. We'll be right back.